Welcome to Planet Vero Radio, recorded at the Idea Garden Advertising Studios in Vero Beach. This is the Story of Liberty with your host, John Bona.
Good evening and welcome to the Story of Liberty. I'm your host, John Bona, and with me are Jennifer Featherstone and Dan Williamson. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, John.
Hey, Dan, how's it going up there?
Wisconsin. We're in a heat wave.
Are you?
35 to 40 degrees. We're getting the suntan lotion out. We'll have a T-shirts on by Saturday.
Is that right? Yeah, well, I'm excited you're coming down for the prayer breakfast February 7th in Riverside Park. And you and your two daughters, right?
Yep, Jessica and Alicia. They're going to help out.
That's exciting. It's the 8th annual Vero Beach Prayer Breakfast coming up on February 7th. That's a Tuesday morning at Riverside Park in a huge tent. And I know, Jen, you've been working on the ticket sales. It just surged again. We're almost at 1,000, I guess.
Yeah, we're getting close to sold out. So if you're interested in coming, please go online to verobeachprayerbreakfast.com and order your tickets. Or you can call 772-492-1041. If no one answers, go ahead and leave your name and number, and we'll give you a call back.
You know, Dan, as you know, one of the great things about a tent is you could expand it. And so we use a tent and that you could add sections to. And so we're expecting upwards of 2,000 people this year. And then we have close to, 350 volunteers, I guess.
Yeah, I believe so this year, yes.
So it's exciting. You know, the vision of this breakfast has always been to, when people come together bound by the Spirit of Christ, it's always about Him. There's a shared commitment and, a great love for one another. Extraordinary things happen. It's been wonderful to see over the years different denominations of people come together at least one morning a year and just, break bread together. And in keeping with these precepts, small groups of men and women in really every nation have found a better way for everyday living through obedience and faithfulness to Christ the Lord. Our breakfast, this will be our 8th prayer breakfast in Vero Beach. And like many of those in the 50 states, just about every state has one. Dan, I know Wisconsin and Minnesota have them up there. You've been to them, right?
I've been to the one in Minnesota up in the Twin Cities, and been to that a couple times, actually. Very nicely done. But the Vero Beach Prayer Breakfast is the largest that I've ever seen, and I actually think is the best. But yeah, it's wonderful, and I guess people have all different faith walks, but it's really nice to see that we can gather together and we can worship God and glorify Him, and agree on that particular issue, and break bread, and then have fellowship, and listen to someone speak on some principles. I think that's a wonderful thing to do in any community.
Yeah, most of the people I've talked to all have a common kind of, they ask what it's about, and people of faith always say, it's really to seek the Lord's direction as we're starting the new year in their lives, and pray for guidance, and to also recognize our privileges, all the blessings we have in America, and the responsibilities that we have going forward. But it's nice because Vero Beach gets linked to other communities to, share that same desire to deepen the spiritual walk, the spiritual life, and strengthen the moral fiber in our community. And so, it's nice for us to be able to join with other people across the country, people that are gathering right around that same time, similar breakfasts that are inaugurated by governors and mayors. And they find through the fellowship of Christ that we can build stronger communities, better communities. I think the national prayer breakfast is the Thursday after. And, Wintley Phipps, In case you don't know of Wintley, he's one of the greatest gospel singers in America. He'll be providing all the inspirational music. And our keynote this year is the daughter of Billy Graham, Ann Graham Lotz. And we're really excited about her coming.
Very excited.
She's our first woman keynote. And so we're really happy that she's accepted our invitation. And so anyway, we're excited about it. We're also excited about a film we're making called Monumental with Kirk Cameron that we trust God will use to help America. And this film basically is about the message of a monument in Plymouth, Massachusetts called the Forefathers Monument, or the National Monument to the Forefathers. Its message is so deep-rooted. It's really inspiring. It's so powerful. And the central theme of this film that will be coming out, I think the target date now is March 27th. It's the message from this monument, the Pilgrim story, and how they lived out a strategy of building a lasting, free and prosperous society. And Kirk Cameron has done a great job of introducing that. He's a great storyteller, and Jen and I just viewed a rough draft of it last night, and we're excited about it. It's going to be, I think, a very important film that'll be released in many theaters throughout the nation. And basically, the particular theme, and we'll talk about some of this morning, what dominates our story in Monumental is that, this film reflects an awareness of the great continuing conflict that exists between good and evil, between liberty and tyranny, in human conduct. And it's important that we find a solution soon, or go the way of other civilizations, which we don't want to happen, right? We need to keep liberty in America, right, guys?
Exactly.
That's right.
After viewing the rough draft of the movie last night, I have to tell you, I left feeling inspired and energized, and just the fact that our forefathers, that the Pilgrims left us this guidance, and that we didn't know about it, and that we're finding out about it now, and it's been there in front of us all this time, is amazing to me. And I can't wait for all you to see it. You're just going to be so inspired and so energized after watching this film. It's awesome.
It really is. And we've been working on it now over 2 years with Dr. Marshall Foster of the World History Institute, who's a very integral part of this program. He's taking leave right now. Marshall, if you're listening out there in California, he's writing the follow-up book, the Monumental book, and finishing the movie. He's working every day with Kirk Cameron, and they're finishing the film. And so we keep praying for them, and that they get it done right and on time.
And if you'd like to learn more about the Forefathers Monument, the Story of Liberty has done several shows on the past explaining it. You can go to our website, thestoryofliberty.net, and click on podcasts. And there's 4 or 5 different programs that the Story of Liberty has done explaining the monument.
It's really exciting. I had the opportunity last night, too, to talk to a couple of the investors in the film who are doctors. And, we were talking about namely the fulfillment of, our social responsibility, or people call it the cultural mandate, that Christians have established in our past to advance God's kingdom on earth. And, first the question that we talked about is, what is our mission on this planet as Christians? What are we doing? And I think the Great Commission does answer that in Matthew 28, 18 through 20. And they're right, But unfortunately, for us, a large segment of the church has limited this just to personal conversion. And we talked about this last night, and it's part of our film in Monumental. Now, for sure, the Great Commission is primary and, of course, includes evangelism, to pull people from the fires of hell. That's important. But it also includes a social responsibility to redeem the planet. See, God is both creator and redeemer, and so to understand his fundamental plan, you just need to look at the first verse in Scripture, Genesis 1:1. Right, Dan? In the beginning, God created. See, he rules over his creation from the very beginning. He does whatever he pleases to do, and the book of Psalms tells us. Psalms 115. And since he's sovereign, all of us that trust and believe in him have responsibilities before him, to him. Dan, it's interesting. I was talking to these two doctors that have beautiful children, very special, and they're very unique, and all of us are made with distinction and in the image of God. I know all my grandchildren are. They're so unique and different, and they have different characteristics. They have different God-given abilities. And, unfortunately, our mission to rule over this earth, to take control as a servant of God, with this servant attitude, as vice regents for him over his creation, we've lost that, haven't we, Dan?
We sure have. You've talked about this forefathers monument, and you've talked about the book of Genesis. And there's two things I want to kind of put out there to start this broadcast, and that is, one, if you reject the first 13 chapters of Genesis, meaning you don't believe that God created, you don't believe there was a great flood, you don't believe these fundamental starting principles, that God drove them out of the Garden of Eden, there was a relationship between man and woman that was established called marriage, there was relationships and roles. If you reject those first 13 chapters, you've pretty much rejected the entire Bible. That's why there's been such an assault on the book of Genesis. At the same time, in the book of Revelation, it tells us to remember the first things. When you've fallen, you remember the first things and go back. And when I was walking my son through preparation for manhood, I took him on a series of historical journeys. And Marshall Foster actually was with us on many of these. We went to Williamsburg, we went to Jamestown, we went to Boston, to Plymouth. And when we came to the Forefathers Monument, and I didn't have to say much. He walked up and he videoed and recorded everything on that monument. And he has been studying each of those things individually, because that monument is supposed to take us back and remind us of what it took to build the American Republic based on biblical principles. What did it look like? What were the cornerstones? The Liberty Man, what did he look like? And so when we take on this combat, the Bible tells us, first of all, we go to Matthew 28, and it says we're to disciple all the nations, not some. And when you disciple, it's not just evangelize somebody, but now it's a training them up and teaching them. And then if I go to the book of Corinthians, it tells us that we're to cast down all arguments, take down all strongholds, and bring every thought into captivity for Christ. There is no area that God does not speak to in his word. And so even when we think about science as an example, science is looking for the intelligent design within the creative world. It's not random, it's not arbitrary, it's not by chance, and it says in creation, God made it and it was good, which means for evolution to thrive, you must have good things that I guess aren't so good. Then they have to have something that's better be created, and it overcomes the thing that's not so good. Well, God says it was good. Everything was perfect. It all worked perfectly. And so when the scientist is out looking for something, the reason we have science, the reason Christianity birthed science all over the world and had all these discoveries is because scientists knew that God had created everything with this perfection. And all they had to do was look for the order, the designed order in the cell, the designed order in a creature or animal, the designed order in the universe. And by using the scientific method, we have an idea and we test it and we falsify it and we find out if it holds, and pretty soon we have a law. Gravity works. And if gravity didn't work, then you could jump from an office building and everything would be okay. But we know that you have a couple seconds of euphoria, and then gravity very much works. That's because there's a designed order to everything. So when science tries to tell us that everything's an arbitrary chance, it's caused by mutation, they're just believing something that isn't there. That is not what we see in the ordered world. And that's why the Darwinian scientists of Darwin's day admitted that if the cell was anything more than a blob, their theory would fall apart. Well, modern science and our ability to see into the cell and see at these microbiological levels, the blood clotting system, flagellum, all these, the cell has an entire factory within it that is uniquely designed in order that if any piece does not work, the whole system collapses. We now have men like Stephen Jay Gould, who's now passed away, that had to create his own theology called punctuated equilibrium, a form of communism. We have Richard Dawkins, who even is caught on a tape saying, well, maybe the aliens did it, because he really has no answer. And Walter Provine, I think, who is now passed away due to brain cancer, I'm not positive on that, who just is hardened. He just will not accept anything other than his theology of atheism. These men have their own faith. It's not a faith based on what we really see. It's a faith on what they want to believe.
You know, Dan, when you were talking about taking your son to the Forefathers Monument, it made me remember a story from John Quincy Adams. He was our 6th president, and he wrote this series of letters to his son, teaching his son about the Bible and the Scripture and applying that to life and on government. It's a very interesting set of letters. And the principle of teaching our children truth. You know, Pilate asked, what is truth? You know, and then he said that he found no fault in Jesus. All of us have to ask that question, what is truth? And then we have to figure that answer out and teach our children these principles, these foundations for them to pass that on to their children. And John Quincy Adams, in the letter to his son, he said, the law given from Sinai was a civil and municipal, as well as moral and religious code. It contained many statutes of universal application laws essential to the existence of men in society, and most of which have been enacted by the very nation which ever possessed any code of laws. See, we have a lack in today's society where we're not teaching our children. Our educational system, we know, is very secular. And we're not teaching our children that these code of laws, this basis foundation for our society, is based on the law given from Sinai. And without that principle, without that code, without that instruction, our children aren't going to know the truth. So now it falls to the responsibility of the parent to teach. So what we need to do is we need to start really instilling this into our children if we're going to save our country. The next generation has to have these principles and this moral code and understanding of where freedom comes from, where liberty comes from. Daniel Webster gave us a warning about this. He was a founding father, a very famous speaker, writer, talented guy. And he said, if we and our posterity reject religious instruction and authority, violate the rules of internal justice, trifle with the injunctions of morality, and recklessly destroy the political constitution which holds us together, no man can tell how sudden a catastrophe may overwhelm us that shall bury all our glory in profound obscurity. Now, if we listen to these warnings that the men who help put together our freedom and our liberty have given us, we can see what things we need to avoid. So we need to avoid destroying our Constitution. We need to avoid the loss of morality. And we need to avoid the loss of truth. And these principles are so important to keep our foundation of freedom and liberty strong. And unfortunately, most of these things have been taken out of our educational system.
You know, going back to, let's go back to the beginning a little bit. I think that's important at this point. You know, sin separated us from God. And that sin brought a curse and loss. And so man was unable to fulfill his original responsibilities that were delegated to him. from God. Now, but God, because of his loving nature that he showed us from the very beginning, that he actually planned from the dateless past, from the unmeasured eternity, his love, the love of God, drew this plan of salvation that we're all familiar with. And it was used to also restore us so we could fulfill our delegated responsibilities on the earth. And I love that verse in Genesis 3:15, where God promises that the seed of the woman would destroy the serpent, Satan. And Christ the Lord was the seed who came to reverse the curse and help us fulfill the mission that was originally given to Adam and Eve. See, God made covenants with us over time, right? But when the time had arrived for the new covenant, and it was through Christ who was slain from the foundation of the world. So what I'm saying is that the purpose of salvation in Christ cannot be grasped until you look at the original purpose God had for us in the beginning. In other words, of course, salvation means the purpose of getting us to heaven, but it also includes helping us to our original position. And Christ is the only one who brought the new covenant that he has with the Father, and that includes these social responsibilities. Jesus delivered his kingdom to rule and reign over all his creation. He's the creator. And that includes government. It says, Isaiah says, the government shall be upon his shoulders. In all these areas of life, as I said, I've heard this term, he reversed the curse, and that affects all spheres of life. So he brings redemption to all areas of life. Law, government, education, arts, business, politics, all these things that we see on the Forefathers Monument. Right, Dan? He taught us to pray. His kingdom to come and his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So my point here is that there's good news for people that believe in God, for the children of God, because we could fulfill both the social and the evangelical responsibilities. God's purpose for us, to live in his image, to be fruitful, multiply, be disciples for him. I think that's our responsibility. It remains our primary function, I said, as Christians, to tell others about Christ, about his saving grace. But we're also supposed to use all our resources to express his image on earth. And so, Dan, as you talked about, and I'd like to talk about this in the second half, to discover truth through the sciences and to apply truth, his truth, to technology, to interpret the truth through humanities, and engage truth in commerce, education, arts, government, law. Dan, in the past, Christians really have led the way here, haven't they? But we've departed in the past years, and that's why we're in the position we're in this country now, as you said, Jenna. And that's why we're doing the Monumental film. But anyway, it's exciting to know that God is faithful. This is his world. And we'll be back in a few minutes with the story of liberty. Welcome back to the Story of Liberty. I'm your host, John Bona, and with me are Dan Williamson and Jennifer Featherstone. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Good evening, John.
And we're talking about, fulfilling the cultural mandate this morning. this evening. I'm losing track of time here. Hey, we're coming close to the Vero Beach Prayer Breakfast again. It'll be February 7th at Riverside Park. And the keynote speaker this year is the daughter of Billy Graham, Ann Graham Lotz. And all our inspirational music will be provided by great gospel singer Whitley Phipps. And that'll be 7:30 Tuesday morning, February 7th, at Riverside Park in a giant tent.
If you'd like to get some tickets, go on to VeroBeachPrayerBreakfast.com and order your tickets there. It's going to be a delicious breakfast by Panera Bread. Orchid Island Juice is donating all the orange juice again. I know how many of you look forward to that. It's going to be absolutely a wonderful time in the morning, and I look forward to seeing everyone there. You can also call 772-492-1041 to order tickets. And also, if you're interested in volunteering, if you're with a group, Girl Scouts or any other group locally in Vero here, and you'd like to help out at the prayer breakfast, go to VeroBeachPrayerBreakfast.com and click on volunteer and go ahead and sign up. We really appreciate all the help the community has provided us this past 8 years. It's a real blessing.
It really is a blessing, and we're just happy to be able to have support of the community and the city, and just be able to put this event on every year. And it's been great to been able to do this year after year, and we're in our 8th year, and so we hope there's many more to come. I mean, I can't believe it's the 8th year already. It goes so fast. I remember the first one with Dr. Barry Black, the U.S. Senate chaplain. And I think that's one of the things. God has really blessed us with some great keynote speakers. David Jeremiah spoke, and Ravi Zachariah. Pastor Jim Cymbala of the Tabernacle up there in Brooklyn. And, of course, last year we had Kirk Cameron. And this year, the daughter of Billy Graham, which really was kind of a shocker. When we invited her, I really didn't expect her to be able to accept the invitation. It was a real surprise because the Graham family, her and Franklin, the two primary children in the ministry of Billy Graham, who's now in his 90s. They're so busy. Their schedules are just every day they're somewhere. And so we're very thankful that she's able to come and spend a few days here. The family used to vacation here years ago. Billy used to bring the family to Vero Beach. This was kind of their winter runaway from the cold air, even up there in Charlotte. And so they would come here I didn't know that until I talked to their office. And Mel Graham may also come. He's kind of the business arm of the family. He's the nephew of Billy Graham. He's a very successful businessman and has developed all kinds of projects up there. And he may come and join us and give a testimony as well. So we're excited about it, Dan.
Absolutely. Also, I kind of would remind people I've been going to the prayer breakfast now for 7 or 8 years. I can't remember how many I've been to. I think I missed only the first one. But each year that I'm there a couple days early watching what's going on, for the people that are waiting to the last minute to sign up, I would really recommend they not do that because it fills up. And I've watched Carol trying to fit that last couple of people in. So I'd really encourage people to sign up early so we can get the table set and get people in the tent in a way that they can all have a good view. Because I do know I watched Carol on the phone those last 2 days when we're busy setting things up, and she's scrambling trying to get this last person and that last person in. And one of these times there's just not going to be one more spot. So I really want to encourage people. And also, you mentioned, John, that it's interesting, Miss Lott, she's actually the best speaker of the crew, and I didn't really realize that. They all consider her the best speaker of the family. So it should be very exciting to hear her presentation at the prayer breakfast. I'm very excited to be there.
If you go to VeroBeachPrayerBreakfast.com, we have a link to Anne Graham Lott's website where she offers free materials to be sent to you on your email every day. And you can go ahead and go there and sign up for it. I did that myself last month, and the information that she sends out is just amazing. And, you know, I was just thinking about the first breakfast with Dr. Jerry Falwell. And you were saying you couldn't believe how the prayer breakfasts, we're on our 8th year now. And I remember you standing there saying, one day we're going to stand here, they're going to say it's the 10th annual Vero Beach Prayer Breakfast.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, there's no way, you know, that's so far away, and here we are on the 8th. And it's just amazing to see what God has done with it. It's just really amazing.
Dr. Falwell was our keynote the second year, and he, of course, he's going to be with the Lord and left behind. What a legacy he's left behind. Very thankful that we were actually, I think our event was the last event he spoke at outside of his church. He passed away very shortly after that, maybe within a matter of months. And he, of course, left Liberty University in good hands with his 2 sons and Thomas Road Baptist Church up there in Virginia. You know, Liberty has over 50,000 students.
It's a great school.
On campus and off campus, their external degree. And now they're Division I athletes, and the guys going into the pros, and all kinds of great leaders for Christ out there in all areas of life. I mean, that's what we're talking about this morning. That's what, Dr. Falwell used to always talk about, that we're to observe all that Christ commanded us. And be salt and light, right? Light of the world and salt of the earth. And these are unique. These are different. And he was a big proponent of not being politically correct. And miss him. He's a good friend. So, Dan, you were talking about, before the break, you were getting into the complexity of cells and all the great discoveries that are out there with the no longer simple single cell, right?
Oh my, the cell with the invention of the micron microscope. I'm losing the word here, but it's the microscope that can see right through into things.
Nuclear?
Yes. What we've seen now in the cell is a complex factory. A factory that's moving materials within the human body on a daily basis, producing proteins and unstranding and restranding the DNAs to pull the right elements off to construct another cell and send it out. And all that has design everywhere on that cell. And that then moves to the next level. You look at the eye's construction, the fingernail, the blood clotting system. These were all things that 200, 300, 400 years ago, even 100 years ago, we really did not have a very good sense of what they looked like. We thought the cell was a gate, some kind of an organism inside, and a signal that opened and closed the gate to let things in and out of it. And that was about all people knew about the cell, 80 years ago. Today, the cell is a complex factory with a rival anything that we've ever made on Earth. And with that discovery, moving into the microorganisms, then beginning to look at the different hydras and flagellants and looking at the rotary motors and these tiny, tiny little creatures, it's beyond anything that could have happened by the random chance of evolution. And so the evolutionary theology, and it really is a philosophy. It isn't science, it's philosophy. We never could prove evolution. We could never prove creation. We weren't there. We weren't there to observe it happening. That is a faith proposition. And the faith proposition usually comes back to sane people looking at things with common sense and an open mind, even if they're not Christian or they are Christian or whatever, and still looking at things as they really are. And God says in the book of Romans that God made things very obvious to all of us, that there's this created order in everything. But we've chosen not to believe that, to not receive that information. And that's why you see this philosophy of Darwinian evolution, punctuated equilibrium, Lamarckian tree theology, which is a tree, an evolutionary tree, people hang on to this because it's actually their faith. It's their religious faith. It's not science. And I try to remind people of that, because science are things that are observable, testable, and then it eventually becomes a law. And even laws can be brought back and re-examined in time. So that's what we're facing out there in the culture. We're facing, as Christians, another religion and another faith proposition, another philosophy, another worldview that has with it a theology of atheism, a philosophy of naturalism. There's only the natural world and that's all there is, and then it relegates itself through every area of life and has an effect on it. And frankly, when Jesus stands before Pilate and he says, why did you come into this world? Well, I came to testify to the truth. And it's funny, Jenna, you read that scripture how he said, I found no guilt in this man. It's the one time in Pilate's life he's actually come to a firm understanding of a truth. The truth is this man was innocent. And Pilate never recovered. There's some writings that say he went into Spain and he eventually committed suicide. He never did get over what happened at that moment when he faced truth. The truth will always either set us free or it will bind us and eventually send us to perdition if we don't seek the truth and receive it. That is the battle in the culture today.
You know, Dan, it's interesting because nothing's new under the sun. I mean, this has always been a, like you were saying earlier, the fight between good and evil, so to say. And evolution is so far from what our founders intended because, like you said, it's a religion. And our founders did base our government, our system here on Christianity. In fact, John Adams, this just shows, the Bible teaches creationism, intelligent design, not evolution. And John Adams says, I have examined all religions. And as a result, in that, the Bible is the best book in the entire world. And that's a letter that John Adams wrote to Thomas Jefferson. And then Jefferson wrote a letter to John Adams, back to John Adams, and he said, the general principles on which the fathers achieved independence were the general principles of Christianity. I will avow then that I believed and now believe that those general principles of Christianity are as eternal and immutable as the existence and attributes of God. Now, we need to look at this and think to ourselves, where have we gone off track? How has this happened to us? Is science... Are we putting science above God when God is the creator of science? Are we, our entire measurement of trying to justify the truth is off whack? And, Thomas Jefferson said one thing that will always stick in my mind with this. See, when we put evolution before God, when we put anything before God, it's an immoral act. It's a sin. And Thomas Jefferson gave us warning to this. He said, give up money, give up fame, give up science. Give the earth itself and all it contains rather than do an immoral act. And never suppose that any possible situation or under any circumstance it is best for you to do this dishonorable thing. However slightly so it may appear to you. Whatever you are to do, ask yourself how you would act if you were at all the world looking at you, and act accordingly. Encourage all your virtuous dispositions and exercise them whenever an opportunity arises. So he's telling us there, Thomas Jefferson, one of our founders, that do not put these things, science, the earth, money, fame, above our God.
Jenna, that brings up an interesting point, because I've heard people say, well, you could believe in evolution and still believe in God and the Bible. I've heard that. Well, a man named Thomas Huxley, he was Darwin's bulldog. Because Darwin was a very quiet, kind of sickly man. He was a retired fellow who didn't get involved in debates. He wouldn't come out in the public. So he had Huxley carry the ball for him. And Huxley was quoted as saying that the central doctrine of evolution is directly antagonistic to that of God's creation. See, he was saying that evolution, if you consistently accept it, It makes it impossible to believe in the Bible. He said that, the proponent of evolution. Yet, there's many students, and my younger son, without mentioning names, removed him from a college. Well, why don't I say it? Furman. They were teaching him in school this evolutionary theory. So we took him out of Furman University. He had a baseball scholarship. And we pulled him out of there because they were ramming this indoctrination of evolution. And does it make a difference? You bet it does. I mean, you look at the problems of the last 150 years or so, and people are going to be shocked to hear this, I think. Hitler himself aggressively accepted, eagerly, these evolutionary platitudes of Darwin, this idea of a super race. Where do you think Hitler got that from? The subtitle of Darwin's book about the survival of the fittest, it led right into Hitler's idea of a superman, a super race. Mussolini, he constantly quoted these Darwinian catchphrases. And Karl Marx, the founder of communism, as you probably remember, he asked Darwin to write the introduction to Marx's book, Das Kapital. So not only communism and Nazism, fascism, all these anti-Christian isms have come down the pike over time. They're all based on evolution. They all come out of it. This is how bad this is. People are missing this. And
John,
yeah, go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, if a Christian wants to put these things in perspective, the Westminster Catechism says the chief end of man, the first question, what is the chief end of man? It's to glorify God and enjoy his blessings forever. So we take that concept and we take the creative concept and we see that blossom into so many blessings and glorifications of God in creating and building positive things. If we go over to evolution, first, it's an old argument. It goes all the way back to Mars Hill and Paul debating the Epicureans and the Stoics, as they're put in the Bible. The Stoics are your socialists, and the Epicureans were your New Agers, both evolutionary thinkers. So it's old. It's not new. And yet we look at Margaret Sanger's work and her eugenics program. Her eugenics program in the United States based on Darwinian evolution, which is what the origin of species by means of natural selection for the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. That should tell you a lot immediately, that title. But her work in eugenics was to basically exterminate the African American population in America that was not productive. Hitler read Margaret Sanger's works and thought, this is marvelous. I can use this for my Aryan race, and I can exterminate all those groups of people that are less than the great Aryan race. And then we were led into a century of bloodshed called World War I, World War II, okay? But it was this idea of evolution. Now, you sit here as a Christian, you look at these two, and you're saying, well, somehow evolution it can conform within the Bible, and evolution can be a part of our Christian doctrine. Look at the outworkings of each one. One, creation, Genesis, God created man, woman in the image of God to build and glorify God and do things that are beautiful and wonderful, and look what we get. Science discovers, it sees things, it builds great buildings, flying buttresses, stained glass windows. This is what comes out of it. Gorgeous things. And on the other side, we see the ones that take evolution and just follow its natural trail to abortion of 53 million babies in America, who knows how many around the world, to the murder of hundreds of millions of people in World War II, and we're not even talking about the Chinese Revolution where millions were killed. Pol Pot in Cambodia. These are all Darwinian-based, evolutionary-based ideas that say one animal can overcome another animal, the dialectic model, and then you'll have a better animal.
I'm sorry. You know what, Dan? It's interesting because we were talking about how the founding fathers never anticipated we were going to go down this road towards evolution. We talked about in the past how they stated many times, "Oh, you can walk around the United States for days and never run into a evolutionist," It wasn't popular then. And even though they try to put that label onto our founding fathers now. And, Congress now doesn't have the best approval rating. We all know that. But this is Congress back in 1854. And they said, had the people during the Revolution had a suspicion of any attempt to war against Christianity. Let's think about that now. We all know there's a war on Christianity. That revolution would have been strangled in its cradle. In this age, there is no substitute for Christianity. That was the religion of the founders of the Republic, and they expected it to remain the religion of their descendants. That is the first session of the 33rd Congress, 1854. How have we allowed the secularists, the humanists, the evolutionists, how have we allowed them to take our country's foundation out from us? We need to wake up and realize that our country is built on something amazing and powerful.
That's right, Jenna.
Some of our founders saw it coming, Jenna. I hate to say this, but some of our founders did see it coming. Elias Boudinot did read The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine, and he wrote The Age of Revelation as a book to his children, warning them that the seeds of humanism, of Enlightenment humanism, were right on the horizon. And he warned them when the sun came up with those ideas one day, he gave them that book, The Age of Reason. It's a wonderful book written to his daughter, which warned her and gave her tools to push back against humanism.
Dan, go ahead.
I'm just going to close with this. Charles Francis Potter in 1908, one of the writers and founders and signers to the Humanist Manifesto, made this comment: what can 1 day of Sunday school do to compete with 5 days of humanist education in the schools? I want you to ask yourself, do you ever see the book of Genesis actually taught in the school system? Do we ever see the Bible read without interpretation as it was supposed to be read in the Northwest Ordinance? No. He was right. We've been taken captive because we were asleep. We did not fight the battle when we needed to, and now Christians need to wake up. They need to get their kids in their homes, and they just need to start teaching them those principles that the Founding Fathers understood, starting in Genesis 1:1. And fathers need to sit down and mothers need to sit down in their living rooms and teach these principles day in and day out. And God is very faithful to those that do that.
Well, we do. We live in God's world, and His world operates according to His certain universal principles, like the law of gravity and motion. And these things cannot be changed. Remember, folks, we don't break God's law and get away with it. God's law breaks us. He's a faithful God. Put your trust in Him. Thank you for joining us at the Story of Liberty. Have a good evening.